about half of that signed up, so if anyone else that jumps on, they can catch up with us. Thank you all for joining us today for our first colleagues conversation of the year. Um, we plan on having these scheduled quarterly throughout this year, and we hope that you find these programs useful and good sources of information to keep up on issues affecting our museum and archives works here in Missouri and in our field in general. Um, my name is Levi Cullifer. I'm the vice president for MAMA. Um, Chris, who is our president, is not able to present today and talk today due to personal reasons. So if you see me looking down, I am reading off a script that he wrote. So uh, uh, I'm pleased to let you know that Mama will be a full participant this year in the AAM's Advocacy Day in February. Chris will be attending the sessions on Capitol Hill this year. He also wanted noted to thank the Mama Board for approving the funding to make this happen in years past. We participated in person, and during the COVID year, we did virtual. Last year, AAM returned to in person, but we did not have the funds to go, unfortunately. And I think we all agree that advocacy for museums and archives is always a much needed practice, especially now in our current climate. And he will provide a update when he returns. Also like to remind everyone to take advantage of our monthly newsletter. We'd love to spread the word about any of your projects, exhibits, new staffs, new finding aids, volunteer spotlights, etc. Pictures are always welcome as well. You can contact Angela Wells for details on submissions. Again, we'd like to thank the Mama Board for this opportunity, but also thank you for being a member. Without your membership support, we could not do what we do to speak for Missouri museums and archives. For those of you who aren't members, I would ask you to please consider joining. Also ask that you consider speaking to your institution's board or leadership and encouraging them to join at the institutional level. It definitely helps with our advocacy efforts to show that we have institutional support across the state and at all levels, big and small. Information on membership can be found on our website at missourimuseums.org. Just as a courtesy note, during the presentation, please make sure that you're muted throughout the presentation just for consideration of the presenter. And to note that our next colleague conversation will be in April, and it'll be focusing on Route 66 anniversary, that many people across the state will be doing celebrations, and we are going to coordinate some talks between those coordinators at the different state sites or institutions. Okay. And to note at the end, we'll have questions at the end of the presentation and also a survey that I would like for you all to fill out for the task force. Let's get on with our program. Abandoned property can be a big problem. I'm sure most of you deal with the occasional donation drop-off on your doorstep with little or to no documentation. Now it is your problem to handle this orphan. Best practices and abandoned property laws don't allow you to throw away what is not yours. But the current abandoned property laws are also archaic and impractical. Today's presenter is Beth Carter, Registrar at the Missouri Historical Society. Beth unfortunately has had to deal with this issue all too frequently. She's going to explain the current circumstances in Missouri, and then I will talk about Missouri Mama's plans to try and make our lives easier when it comes to abandoned property law. So without further ado, please welcome Beth Carter.
Thank you so much, Levi. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can I get a thumbs up that the presentation is sharing? Thank you so much, Levi. Right, so as Levi said, I'm going to be talking about updating the Missouri's museum property law today. And here's sort of a rough outline of what I'll be discussing today. We're going to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to go into the shortcomings of the way the law is currently written, which will lead us into a task force kickoff. So, first of all, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a museum registrar, so I just want to get that out there that this is for general information and does not substitute legal counsel. All right, the Missouri Museum Property Act establishes procedures for museums to deal with abandoned loans and undocumented property. And this law allows museums to legally acquire title under specific circumstances. And it's important to note that the Museum Property Act overrides general lost and unclaimed property law in Missouri. And the two things I'll be discussing today are abandoned loans. So these are property loaned to a museum where the lender is difficult to locate. Old loans, sometimes those loans that have come in maybe 100 years ago and that are still lingering around. And undocumented property, and also known as found in collection or FIC. The Museum Property Act has several sections to it, but just the highlighted portions is what I'm going to be able to cover today. I'll start out with some definitions here. And the first definition I want to go over is what is a museum? So all of us on this call, I'm assuming kind of looking through some of the names I see here, we are all museums. So this is planetariums, nature centers, libraries, zoos, botanical gardens, historical sites, historical societies, arboretums. We are all museums under this law. So you can see here, this is an institution operated by a permanent nonprofit corporation, trust association, or public agency operated primarily for educational, scientific, historical preservation, or aesthetic purposes. These institutions own, borrow, and care studies and archives or exhibits property. Few other definitions. Claimant versus lender. A claimant is the person who files a notice of intent to preserve interest in something and that is on loan to a museum, which can differ from a lender. So back to that example of a loan that comes in the 1920s, that original lender is probably no longer with us to be able to claim that property. So the claimant would be whoever is would like to preserve interest in that loan. A loan is a deposit of property to a museum that is not accompanied by a title of property. And undocumented property are items in your collection where we can't figure out the owner by reference to our own records. So this law governs the process by which we can terminate a loan of property and eventually acquire title to that property if the owner fails to claim it. So we'll start off here talking about acquiring title to loaned property. So the law outlines the conditions for the termination, your notice procedure, and when a museum can legally acquire title to that loaned property. Your museum can start the process to terminate a loan if the property has been in your custody for at least 7 years and one of the following is true. So the loan was either for an indefinite term and the museum has received no written contract from the lender regarding the property in a 7-year time period, or the loan was for a specified time and that has expired. Additionally, that will need to have been in your custody for at least 7 years. Your next step is a notice procedure. Your institution will need to issue a notice to the lender or claimant, if you know them. This notice will need to clearly state that your museum intends to terminate the loan, and it says that the lender needs to contact the museum in writing to establish ownership, and they need to make arrangements to collect the property. The notice also needs to say that if the lender fails to respond within 90 days of the notice, it will be considered that they have donated the property to a museum. And what's nice about the law is that they provide a template right here, so you don't have to even create anything. You can just fill in as such. It's important to note that this notice must be sent via restricted certified letter mail. And I'll go over what to do if you don't know the address of the lender or claimant in a moment. So that serves as your legal documentation of that notice. Now, if that lender or claimant fails to respond to the museum notice within 90 days, your museum legally acquires title to the property, but you need to make sure you receive confirmation via restricted certified mail that that lender or claimant has indeed received your notice. Going to shift from old loans to undocumented property. So the statute outlines, again, much like our old loans, the conditions for acquiring title, the notice procedure, and when a museum can consider acquiring title to undocumented property. But what is undocumented property? This generally refers to objects in a museum's possession for which the museum has insufficient or no records to determine the legal owner, donor, or lender. So some examples here are an old unrecorded gift where the paperwork was lost, something that was intended for a donation but never formally accessioned, perhaps a found in collection or an FIC, something that was discovered during your inventory and you have no information, no records about it, or maybe an old loan where the records of the legal owner are insufficient as well. So your museum can start the process of acquiring title to undocumented property if, again, it's been in your possession for at least 7 years and you have no reasonable means of determining the owner, and nobody has come forward to claim that property within that 7-year period. So for undocumented property, you will publish a notice. And you will need to publish a notice that says that your museum's records do not indicate the owner of the property and that you intend to acquire title to the described property. It also needs to say that anyone claiming ownership needs to contact your museum in writing. They must establish ownership and arrange to collect the property. And it also needs to say that failure to make written contact within 90 days of the date of the last notice will be considered a waiver to any claimed property. And much like our previous section, they have a template here in the museum property law that is a simple format that you can follow for your notice. So if a lender or claimant fails to respond to your museum's notice, again within 90 days, you legally acquire title to the property. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this notice procedure now. So this section of the law outlines what you need to know about the content and the procedures for public notices. This section will apply to both abandoned loans and undocumented property. And the reason it will apply to abandoned loans is if you don't receive notice via that restricted certified mail letter, you will need to publish a public notice. So your required information will need to be specific details such as the lender's name, the last known address, and a brief description of the property. This section also establishes procedure for when a notice is considered legally delivered, including cases where diligent search fails to find the lender's identity or address. This section will additionally define how the locale of your museum is determined for the purposes of this law. When do you need a public notice? So this will happen when you don't know the identity of the lender and you don't have an address for a lender or claimant. And in instances, like I said, where you send a letter to a lender or claimant and you never receive confirmation that they received that. When you publish a public notice, it will need to be published at least once a week for 2 consecutive weeks in a newspaper of general circulation, and the publication must occur in both the county or city in which your museum is located and the county or city, if appropriate, of the lender's claimant and last address. So for instance, if we have a loan here, an old loan here, and it's from somebody from Springfield, Missouri, I would need to publish something here locally for St. Louis and then also in the area of Springfield, Missouri, because that is the museum, and then also where the lender's last known address was. For public notices, the effective date of the notice will be the second published notice. So as I said in the previous slide, you have to publish for 2 consecutive weeks. Let's talk about why we're here today. This is the shortcomings of Missouri's museum property law. And while this law looks good on paper, let's talk about why this is not serving Missouri museums well. Let's talk about the financial cost. Last year, I spoke with the collection staff at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum here in St. Louis, and I'm sharing this example with their permission. There's an object in their collection that has been there for decades, and they want to claim title to it. So to do so, following the statutes outlined in the law here, they received two quotes from two St. Louis newspapers to publish this public notice. And while they could possibly trim the word count down to maybe lower the cost a bit, you can see that the cost to legally claim title to this piece is cost prohibitive. And remember, this is just for one object in their collection. Missouri museums need to post a notice for each object they're wanting to claim title to. Given this price tag, there's no Missouri museum that will be able to accomplish this. This law was passed in 1991, and the world looks and operates quite a bit differently now. First, lenders are more likely to search for information online than they are perhaps newspaper archives. And unfortunately, there are just less newspapers in circulation compared to 1991. Furthermore, museums aren't benefiting from these legal notices because museums cannot afford to do this and to follow the law. I also want to point out one missing component is the doorstep donation. Any of us who have worked in this field, we have received those unsolicited, anonymous donations that just arrive at your doorstep or they're mailed to you. And these cause some problems because there's a lack of documentation regarding the history, the authenticity, the legal ownership. And these donations also lead to questions and concerns about who owns that doorstep donation and can museums keep these objects if they want, and what if they don't want them? The way the law is currently written, if someone anonymously drops something off at your museum to donate, you will need to hold on to it for 7 years and then follow the steps outlined in the Missouri Museum Property Law. And those costs go beyond just those newspaper notices. Staff and volunteer time, that's not free. Environmental controls, security, and fire monitoring all cost money. We are all limited for storage space. We want to use our storage space to care for the collections that serve our institutions. And archival supplies are quite costly as well. So in the meantime, there's some best practices that we can all follow. First, maintaining excellent records. Make sure every loan and donation that you receive has a written record with the lender's name and current contact information. And encourage lenders and donors to report changes to their address and contact information as soon as they move or they change their contact information. That you need to ask that you document all attempts to contact non-responsive donors and lenders, and also use certified mail. When you use restricted certified mail for formal notices, this will ensure the clear legal record and documentation there. Work on educating your staff and volunteer to discourage doorstep donations and review your deaccession policy and loan policy. Change is possible, though. All right, let's talk about a couple states that have had changes recently. First, Oklahoma. Prior to last year, they had no museum property law, so they were a little worse off than we were here in Missouri. But it was the Oklahoma Museums Association Advocacy Committee that helped shepherd that through. Also, Nebraska. Nebraska updated a version of their act, and that was passed in 2024. And implementation began in 2025. And their changes moved up timelines and made notices a lot more all-encompassing. So rather than an institution needing to itemize each piece for different notices, they still publish a notice and with contact information to a museum so those interested can reach out to those institutions individually. So a nice compromise there of still doing notices, but making it lot less heavy lifting on those individual notices. All right, so all of you here in this chat can help with the changes we need to make here in Missouri. So I want you to think about how this law impacts your institution. And look at how many old loans are you caring for and how many found in collection objects are in your collection. Think about how many notices you would need to publish to comply and what would that cost your institution. And I'm not just talking about cost for paying for a newspaper publication. Staff, volunteer, intern time, as I said, is not free. These are resources that are time consuming and that will impact the work of your institution. So that's one way that you can start with where we need to be going with this, which kind of leads us off into this task force kickoff. And I'm going to stop sharing this. And Levi, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we can also open up the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, Beth. So essentially, we're going to be kicking off this task force to help kind of address some of these issues that Beth brought up during her presentation. I guess before I go too deep in that, is there any questions that anyone here has regarding the presentation or the law?
Can we just unmute and ask?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. I teach a cultural heritage class for Mizzou, and I was just wondering if I would be allowed to share the recording of this presentation with them as an optional resource.
Beth, that's up to you.
Yeah, I think that would be great. The more we can educate folks about the law, how it's written, and some changes that we can make, absolutely. Please feel free for sharing, and thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Oh, I see Linda here. Hi, Linda. Yay, Oklahoma and Nebraska. Linda was crucial with critical in helping those changes passed in Oklahoma and Nebraska.
And just a note for everyone, Beth and Linda gave a presentation on this same topic at our Mama conference in 2025. And so this isn't the first time this has come up for us. Um, and just to note, multiple states are going through this change of trying to update their laws. There was a concerted effort in the early 90s of museum professionals across the country to create this law originally to help um, standardize the practice in the field and to help museum professionals move forward with their collections. Because apparently, if there was no man's land, there was nothing there. Um, Missouri, believe it or not, is not in as terrible shape as some other states. um, there are some states that are starting this effort. There are some states where it's been stuck for years, stuck in the legislature. But question in the chat: do the new laws in Oklahoma and Nebraska include an online posting component versus a newspaper posting?
In Nebraska, the online posting is there, but it's not required. So you have the option because some places still aren't going to do online postings. So it is in there, but it's not a requirement.
And if you go to the Nebraska State Historical Society website, there is a link there with their current postings, which is really nice. It's just an itemized list of an object ID and a brief description. And so those, I believe, will be posted for 1 year. And after that year passes, if there's no claims, that's undocumented property that will then be able to be assumed by the Historical Society.
Does the law apply to for-profit / corporate museums?
I believe it. I would need to, again, not a lawyer here, so I would ask your legal counsel to clarify that.
They seem pretty broad in their definition.
Yeah.
Just curiously, if anybody's encountered this, because I haven't, how can you determine that a person has a legal claim to an item that you've described briefly in a public notice? You know the original lender or donor or whatever. You have a little bit of information, but you know they've passed away. But then how can you make sure that that person has a legal claim or is just some random who saw the public notice?
I can speak to this a little because I've dealt with it. They need some kind of legal documentation. They need a will, they need probate records. It's not just their word. And the onus is on them to produce documentation. It's not on you to prove that they don't own it. It's on them, the descendants, to prove that it's legally theirs. And it can be difficult for them, but they need some kind of legal document, whether will, whether probate. And you have to keep in mind that if there's the possibility of more than one descendant, they have to prove that they're representing all of them. So that there's not issues. It can be very difficult for them.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
A claimant has 4 years total to prove their claim. It's noted in the chat. So at this point, this is the whole, half of the presentation is talking about the task force. Like Beth said, this affects nearly all museums and archives. Anyone that collects, and granted, as Amy noted, corporate / for-profit, a little gray area. But we are wanting to form this task force in regards to change this law. We see that many museums and archives are suffering under this archaic wording, and we are wanting to change this. Other states are doing this, and a lot of times it's led by their museum associations for that state. During the conference, when we first brought this up, we did have a few people note that they were interested in serving on this task force. It's going to be a volunteer basis. Anyone who would like to join may join it. I do have a link that I will share. This is a very short form, like 4 questions. If you would like to serve on it, you are more than welcome to fill this out. There's also another question on there. We also need data and information. So if you can't serve, that's perfectly fine. But if you like to give data, that would help us tremendously. So what the data would include would be how much money would it cost if you wanted to deaccession and get rid of the items that you would like to get rid of, and then how much supply, staff, time, storage does it cost to keep all these materials? We need all this information when we're going to the legislature. And if you have any experience with the legislature in Missouri, that would be great to have on the task force. Really, there's no disqualifying aspect to be on this task force. It's really we want to change it for the betterment of all museums and archives within the state of Missouri. And this, let's see. Sorry, I'm still reading the chat. Do you want to tell you what? Yes. So if you can tell us how much you've already spent doing this process, that would be great because it tells us, if there's been a progression in the cost, if there's been any change in how you've done it. It's any data that you have on this form of deaccessioning and this, laying claim to item that's been door dropped or personal loans that you would like to get rid of. It would be phenomenal to have. Beth, is there any other things that you can think of that could help when working on this?
I think that is a great starting point. And if we're finding that we need some more stats for the impact on Missouri institutions, we can certainly reach out and go from there. But I think this is a wonderful starting point.
So another from Beth Buckingham. Alaska is working to reduce the time from 7 years to 1 year for obtaining ownership of abandoned property, as well as offering an online or posting in a local post office as a way to publicize. That's such a huge improvement. I know the Missouri Press Association, they have an online notices board on their website. It's unfortunately the way the law works, we can't post there. It has to be in the public paper. And as many people know, newspapers in Missouri are shutting down. The Post-Dispatch for St. Louis, I mean, it's still running as of now, but they don't even print in the area anymore. Publication has moved to Central Missouri, so it's becoming increasingly difficult to find these papers, and as Beth had alluded to, it can be very expensive to do that. So please do fill out that survey if you are at all interested in A, serving on it, or B, just giving us information. Because information is key. We know Missouri legislature is battling its budget right now and trying to make changes to the budget. So especially state institutions, DNR or state archives, this is going to affect the state budget, essentially. If you guys need to do what you need to do with this, it's going to essentially affect them. Is there a timeline for submitting this and getting a sponsor in the Missouri General Assembly? We have not set that up. This will probably be something we talk about in that first task force meeting. We have been kind of shooting around to see who would a best sponsor be, depending on, one, the party that the sponsor is, and two, how to go about tying this in, either to tie it into another bill to get it to pass or having its own standalone bill. There's a lot of questions that are up in the air that the task force will hopefully answer. Just to note, Mama has budgeted for this to pay for some funding to go to testify at Jeff City if we do get to that point. So so people on the task force, depending on how many there are, Mama has set aside limited funds to help with expenses as for traveling. So if there's no other comments or questions or concerns, oh, Beth, would you be willing to share your PowerPoint?
Yep, I can send that to you, Levi.
Okay. Then we other than that, thank you all for joining. And again, the link for the if you would like to join is in the chat. I'll send it again. The Please feel free to respond to it however you see fit.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you everyone for joining today, and we'll see you hopefully in April for Route 66.